Hello and welcome to the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print. So last time we talked about the Marvel Star Wars books, or at least the first arc, if you will, until our next novel, which we have come to today. So today we're going to be talking about the first real Star Wars Expanded Universe novel, and that is Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Now, this book was the very first, as I said, first real Star Wars novel. Because remember, we had the Episode 4 novelization back in 1976, and now we have this. What's interesting about Splinter of the Mind's Eye is that it was actually supposed to be a low-budget sequel to Episode 4, then still called Star Wars, if the movie was a flop, which, of course, obviously it wasn't. So there's a lot of things in here that essentially were mandated because, again, we didn't know if it was going to be a hit or not. So, for example, the set, it's in this swamp, this murky kind of area, so it's nothing too big and all that. And it only includes characters whose actors had for sure signed on. So Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, of course, and no Han Solo. Han Solo, or Harrison Ford, I should say, had not signed on for what would be Empire Strikes Back. So Han does not appear in this novel simply because Harrison Ford had not committed to coming back yet. So it is purely a Luke and Leia story. R2-D2 and C-3PO are featured in it. And of course, as you can see by the cover here, Darth Vader does make an appearance. Now, this is a very first printing from 1978, and it doesn't have the Star Wars logo on it. Even on the side here, it is simply just the Splinter of the Mind's Eye from the further adventures of Luke Skywalker, based on the characters and situations created by George Lucas. Now, a lot of these early Del Rey books were not at first printed in hardback. They came out in paperback. Now, of course, it is possible to get one. You would have to go through the Science Fiction Book Club. I don't really care that much. I'm fine with this. This is pretty cool being an original first press. Now, of course, if you get it now, it has the Star Wars logo on it. Of course, it has the Legends banner and stuff like that. So, that's about it here. Nothing too extravagant, really, and it's pretty short too. It's only 199 pages in the paperback edition, so it's not that long of a novel. So, what's the story here? What is the story of Splinter of the Mind's Eye? Well, basically, Luke and Leia are on their way, or Luke is escorting Princess Leia to this rebel mission, and they end up crashing on this planet or on this moon, and it's of course Mimban. And so it's a very swampy, kind of a Dagobah-ish kind of moon, and so Luke and Leia are basically trying to figure out how to get off the planet. They've come to find that there's actually an Imperial camp there, and so they decide to infiltrate the camp. So they like steal these clothes or these miners' clothes, and they infiltrate the facility to try and stop this. They actually then bump into or meet this old wizard or guard kind of person named Hala, and she is basically overseeing the Kyber crystal, or kind of looking, trying to look for it and protect it. Now, that word Kyber might sound kind of familiar. The Kyber crystal was this thing originally trying and, I guess, maybe explain a little bit more about the Force. Come to find that it actually, or is later revealed to, augment one's Force powers. So, but it's also explained that if you get too far away from it, or if you get too far away from Mimban where it is, it won't work. So like you couldn't take it and then go to like Endor or something and then be able to be super powerful in the Force. It just doesn't work that way. So, and also in the Clone Wars, the Dave Filoni Clone Wars, they actually explain more of the Kyber crystal and kind of tie it into the Force, or the real Force, the living Force. So, that's kind of interesting to see how they later will tie that into later expanded universe material. Um, and this, I did forget to mention too, this is actually written by Alan Dean Foster, who ghost wrote, um, like I said, the A New Hope novelization, and of course would later go on and write The Approaching Storm, which was the lead up novel to Attack of the Clones. So Alan Dean Foster actually writes this, and he kind of had the challenge here because again he's trying to make a novel that they essentially would turn into a potential film. Of course, obviously they didn't. George was still, and George kind of mandated a few things because again we're still trying to kind of figure out, okay, how do we want Empire Strikes Back to play out? Um, you had the basic outline, but you didn't have the screenplay or anything like that. So, anyways, going back to the book, Luke and Leia then are with Hala. And it's also, obviously revealed that Darth Vader is looking for this Kyber crystal, and he actually then, of course, meets up with Luke and Leia. Luke gets pinned underneath this rubble, so Leia actually picks up Luke's lightsaber, goes to fight Vader. She gets shellacked, and so then Luke gets up, he retrieves his lightsaber, and he's like, Obi-Wan Kenobi or Ben Kenobi is with me. And basically, what is established is that through the Kyber crystal, Obi-Wan's spirit is able to basically channel itself through Luke and fight Darth Vader. So technically, Obi-Wan Kenobi is the one that's fighting Darth Vader, not Luke Skywalker, which kind of explains why Luke is able to beat Darth Vader. Actually, what happens is that he actually cuts off Darth Vader's whole arm, and basically Vader falls into this pit or whatever, and basically Vader is defeated by Luke, and ultimately Luke and Leia are able to get off of Mimban and go on their merry way. Now, again, the Kyber crystal basically, like I said, explains how Luke is able to do that, and also we see that Darth Vader is able to cast force lightning, which again is kind of like, well, I thought Vader couldn't do it, because later sources would say that Vader was not able to cast force lightning because his arms and pretty much all of his limbs are cybernetic, and therefore he would fry himself if he tried to do that. So it explains why Vader is able to do that. There are a couple of contradictions, or minor contradictions, with this book, simply because, again, it is the first EU novel. One of them is that Darth Vader's lightsaber is described as blue. Now, how do you get that wrong? I don't know. They would go on and retcon and say that the reason it was described as blue is because of the haze, of the swamp. But in a later comic adaptation that Dark Horse did in the 90s, where they actually adapted this into a comic book, they kind of retconned it and made Vader's lightsaber the correct color. Another kind of a contradiction is there's a lot of sexual tension between Luke and Leia. Now, granted, we didn't know that they were brother and sister. So Alan Dean Foster probably was writing it because, again, Han Solo's not coming back, so there's a love story there. But again, knowing what we know now, it is a little weird because they're brother and sister. Now, again, in the comic adaptation of this novel, they would remove a lot of that. It was still kind of there because it is still sort of there in the films, but it's definitely pulled back a lot more, so it's not too awkward and weird. So that's there, and it's also, there's like one thing in here where it says Luke Skywalker knows how to swim, and Leia doesn't know how to swim, which is weird because Luke is from Tatooine, and Leia's from Alderaan, and Alderaan has more bodies of water, so I don't know if she just never got around to it, and there was like a indoor pool or something at Tatooine or at Anchorhead or something. I don't know. Again, it's a very few things. It's not that big of a deal. But there are a few things, and again, if you're an avid Star Wars fan, you're gonna pick up on this, and um, it might bug you, essentially. So, ultimately, Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Is this an essential read? No, it's not an essential read. This is, though, a fun novel. It's an entertaining one, and if you're interested in the history of the Star Wars expanded universe, or simply Star Wars, in 1978, and kind of thinking that this was, people's true first real continuation of A New Hope, if you don't count the Marvel Comics, then honestly, it might be worth your read. But are you going to miss out on anything in the Star Wars Expanded Universe or the Legends universe if you read this, or if you don't choose to read this? No, you're really not. So I can't really recommend it, but again, if you're interested in old school Star Wars, yeah, it's definitely a good history piece. And again, is the story bad? Not really. But is it essential? No, it is not. So, that about does it for this review. Join me next time where we will be going back to the Marvel comic book series and going more on the next arc in that. So stay tuned. Thanks, folks, and may the Force be with you.